brothers about it. Chapter 37. Joseph's Dreams. So Jacob settled again in the land of Canaan, where his father had lived as a foreigner. This is the account of Jacob and his family. When Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. He worked for his half-brothers, the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. But Joseph reported to his father some of the bad things his brothers were doing. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. One night, Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. "Listen to this dream," he said. "We were out in the field, tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly my bundles stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine." His brothers responded, "So you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. "Listen, I have had another dream," he said. "The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me." This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers. But his father scolded him. "What kind of dream is that?" he asked. "Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you?" But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant. Soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their father's flocks at Shechem. When they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, "Your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them." "I'm ready to go," Joseph replied. "Go and see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along," Jacob said. "Then come back and bring me a report." So Jacob sent him on his way, and Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. When he arrived there, a man from the area noticed him wandering around the countryside. "What are you looking for?" he asked. "I'm looking for my brothers," Joseph replied. "Do you know where they are pasturing their sheep?" "Yes," the man told him. "They have moved on from here, but I heard them say, 'Let's go on to Dothan.'" So Joseph followed his brothers to Dothan and found them there. Joseph sold into slavery. When Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. They made plans to kill him. "Here comes the dreamer," they said. "Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. We can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams." But when Reuben heard of their scheme, he came to Joseph's rescue. "Let's not kill him," he said. "Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him." Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father. So when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. Then, just as they were sitting down to eat, they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? His blood would just give us a guilty conscience. Instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." And his brothers agreed. So when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by, Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. Some time later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. When he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went back to his brothers and lamented, "The boy is gone. What will I do now?" Then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. They sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message: "Look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son?" Their father recognized it immediately. "Yes," he said, "it is my son's robe. A wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. He mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. "I will go to my grave mourning for my son," he would say, and then he would weep. Meanwhile, the Midianite traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Potiphar was captain of the palace guard.
Genesis chapter 37, verse 3. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest, which just favors the rest of them, and they couldn't say a kind word to him. In Joseph's day, everyone had a robe that was worn as primary outer garment, and these were put to many uses, including buttoning up belongings, for a trip, wrapping up babies as a blanket to sit on, even to serve as security for a loan. Most robes wore knee, left, short sleeve, any plain. In contrast, Joseph's robe was probably like the kind worn by royalty, ankle length, long sleeve, and colorful. And this robe became a symbol of Jacob's favorism toward Joseph, and it aggravated the already strained relations between Joseph and his brothers. Favorism in family may be unavoidable, but it is divisive. Effects should be minimized. Parents may not be able to change their feelings toward their favorite child, but they can choose to act wisely and fairly with all their children. Genesis chapter 37, verse 6-11. Joseph's brothers were already angry over the possibility of being ruled out by their little brother Joseph. Still young and probably immature, then seems to have fueled the fire with his attitude in beautiful matter. No one enjoys a braggart. Joseph learned this the hard way. His angry brothers sold him into slavery to get rid of him. After several years of hardship, Joseph learned an important lesson. Because of talents and knowledge come from God, it is more appropriate to thank him for them than to brag about them. Later, Joseph gave God the credit. In Genesis chapter 41, verse 16. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 19-20, can you imagine feeling so jealous that you wanted to kill someone? Before saying, "Of course not," look at what happened in this story. These men were willing to kill their younger brother over a robe and a few reported dreams. Their deep jealousy had grown into ugly rage, completely blinding them to what was right. Jealousy can be difficult to recognize because our reasons for it seem to make sense, but let unchecked jealousy grows quickly and leads to serious sins. The longer you cultivate jealous feelings, the harder it is to uproot them. The time to deal with jealousy is when you notice yourself keeping score of others' recognition, awards, and achievements. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 26-27, the brothers were worried about bearing the guilt of Joseph's death. Judah suggested an option that was not right, but would leave them innocent of murder. Sometimes we jump at a solution because it is the lesser of the two evils, even though it is still not the right action to take. When someone purposely a seemingly workable solution, first ask, is it right? In Genesis chapter 37, verse 28, although Joseph's brother didn't kill him outright, they probably didn't expect him to survive for long as a slave. They were quite willing to let crew slaves, traders, do their dirty work for them. Joseph faced a 30-day journey through the desert, probably chained and on foot. He would be treated baggage in months in Egypt, would be sold as a piece of merchandise. His brothers thought they would never see him again, but God has in control of Joseph's life, and he had other plans. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 29, verse 30, Reuben returned to the cistern to find Joseph, but his little brother was gone. His first response, in fact, was, "What will happen to me?" rather than what will happen to Joseph. In a tough situation, are you usually concerned about yourself? Consider the person most affected by the problem, and you will be more likely to find a solution for it. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 41, verse 45, to cover their evil action, Jacob's sons deceived their father into thinking Joseph was dead, and Jacob himself had deceived other many times, including in his own father. In Genesis chapter 27, verse 35, even though he didn't know at this point, Jacob was learning by hard experience the painfulness and destructive consequences of deceit. In Genesis chapter 37, verse 36, imagine the culture shock Joseph's experience upon arriving in Egypt. Joseph had lived as a nomad, traveling the countryside with his family, caring for sheep, and suddenly he was thrust into the world's most advanced civilization with great pyramids, beautiful homes, sophisticated people, and a new language. While Joseph saw the Egyptian skill and intelligence at their best, he also saw their spiritual blindness. They worshiped countless gods related to every aspect of life. In Genesis chapter, that's the last one. What happened? Oh, sorry. It says the article, as a young man, Joseph was overconfident. His natural self-assurance increased by being Jacob's favorite son, and by knowing of God's designs on his life was unbearable to his 10 old brothers, who eventually conspired against the edge of God, allowed him to survive, conspired against him. But his self-assurance, molded by pain and combined with a personal knowledge of God, allowed him to survive and prosper where most would failed. He added quiet wisdom to his confidence and won the hearts of everyone he met. Potiphar, the prison warden, other prisoners, the pharaoh, and after many years, even those 10 brothers. Perhaps you can identify with one or more of these hardships Joseph experienced. He was betrayed and deserted by his family. He was exposed to sexual temptation and punished for doing what was right. And he endured a long imprisonment and was forgotten by those he helped. As you read his story, note what Joseph did in each case. His positive response transformed each setback into a step forward. He didn't spend much time asking why. His approach was, what shall I do now? Those who met Joseph were aware that wherever he went and whatever he did, God was with him. When you're facing a setback, the beginning of a Joseph-like attitude is to acknowledge that God is with you, no matter the struggle or experiences. Even though you don't understand, his presence is always sheds new light on a dark situation. Reminder, Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8. The Lord himself goes before you, and he will be with you. He will never leave you, never forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. Isaiah 41, verse 10. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, and I will help you. I will uphold you with my unrighteous hand. What is the strength of Joseph's? Learn from strength in a confinement. Rose in power from slave to ruler of Egypt. He became a slave to a ruler of Egypt. Has known for his personal integrity and was a man of spiritual sensitivity. Prepared a nation to survival a famine. The weaknesses and mistakes of his mistakes were youthful pride that caused friction with his brothers. And the lesson from his life was what is matters is not so much the evidence or circumstances of life, but our response to them. With God's help, any situation can be used for the good, even when others intend it for evil. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things, God works for those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose.
Unknown caller.
I don't know that person. Genesis, it says the vital statistics, where was it happen at? Where Canaan and Egypt, occupation, shepherd, slave, convict, rear, and relatives, period. Genesis chapter 41, verse 48. So Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God?